Thank you all for joining us for this virtual open house. I am Edward Nieta with Clackamas County's Department of Public and Government Affairs. I would like to introduce you to our panel today. From Clackamas Water Environment Services, we have West Director Greg Geist, Engineering Supervisor Jeff Stallard, and from Jacobs Engineering Group, we have Archaeologist David Sheldon. After the speaker presentations, there will be plenty of time for you to ask questions. If any attendees would like to ask a question, you'll be able to do so by utilizing the raise hand feature on Zoom. That's at the top or bottom, depending on which device you're using today. Questions will be answered in the order received. Please make sure you use your real name for your Zoom handle so I can properly identify you when you ask a question. This meeting is being recorded, so people who weren't able to attend today can watch it later. And with that, I will turn it over to West Director Greg Geist.
All right, I also want to thank you for joining us today to learn more about this proposed ballot measure and the Outfall project. My name is Greg Geist, and I'm the Director of Clackamas Water Environment Services, also known as WES. You'll also hear today from Jeff Stallard, an engineer for WES and the project manager for this project, as well as David Sheldon, who's the project archaeologist and is leading the historical and cultural aspects of this project. Next slide, please. So with that said, I'll get started. I'd like to start by giving you an overview of who we are at WES and what we do. Basically, we take the dirty water that goes down your toilets and sinks and showers, and we make clean water out of it and return that to the river. In addition to that, we take that waste product and make electricity and a natural fertilizer. We serve about 190,000 people in Clackamas County and treat over 7 billion gallons of wastewater every year. We own and operate 5 wastewater treatment plants or resource recovery facilities, 23 pump stations, and over 340 miles of sewer pipes in the ground that convey the sewage to our various treatment plants. In addition to the resource recovery work that we do, we also manage storm and surface water for a large portion of unincorporated Clackamas County and Happy Valley. Next slide, please. So this is a map of our service area, our primary service area, with a list of the cities there on the left that we serve. WES, like I said, owns and operates the pipes that connect businesses and homes to our treatment facilities, over 340 miles of those pipes. The other cities that we serve, Milwaukee, Westland, Oregon City, Gladstone, also own and operate those sewer pipes within their city boundaries. And combined, they own and operate over 400 miles of those underground sewage pipes, in addition to WES's 340 miles. And so Jeff is going to explain the significance of those many hundreds of miles of pipes for this project. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to transition to really the main reason we're holding this open house. WES is asking for an easement to build a new effluent pipeline beneath John Storm Park in Oregon City. The Oregon City Charter requires a vote of the people in order to grant easements that are unrelated to park use. So our current outfall is nearing capacity during peak wet weather events in the wintertime. Our projections show that we need additional capacity by 2025, and that this project, if approved, will provide the needed capacity through the year 2080. To be clear, an outfall is where we our treated water enters the river. Outfalls are required to be designed to meet state and federal water quality standards for swimming, fishing, and aquatic resources. The proposed project, which is currently estimated at $21.5 million, would be funded as part of WES's current approved capital improvement plan. WES has the funding for this project. The proposed ballot measure, if passed, would not increase taxes. WES is asking for an easement to put an outfall pipeline under John Storm Park. Next slide, please. So if the proposed measure passes, WES will construct the outfall pipeline and restore John Storm Park to its original condition. and do park improvements recommended by the Oregon Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, a tree inventory and mitigation of some hazardous trees. Any additional funding would be used for master planning for both John Storm and Clackamas parks. If the proposed ballot measure doesn't pass, the project as proposed would not take place. Either way, tax rates would not change. And with that, I will hand it off to Jeff Stoller.
Thank you, Greg. A little bit of a background here on how we determined the need for the outfall. In January of 2019, Clackamas Water Environment Services completed a sanitary sewer master planning project. The goal of the master plan project was to provide the district with a 20-year capital plan that helps us. It outlines the whens and the how we need to expand and maintain our sanitary sewer collection system to continue to provide sewer service to our ratepayers. In order to complete the master plan, the district placed flow meters throughout the collection system to obtain real flow data through an entire wet winter season. This data was then used to build a model so that we could predict how future rain events will impact the flows in the collection system. I'd like to clarify that Wes's collection system is a separate system where sanitary sewers and storm sewers are not generally connected together. However, rainfall does have a big impact on flow in our system. The two ways rainfall increases flow in our collection system are inflow and infiltration. On this slide, the image on the left shows the normal pathways for how inflow and infiltration occur. Inflow into our collection system is generally through pipes that are inadvertently or accidentally connected to the wrong system. This occurs with building downspouts, foundation drains, and sometimes an occasional storm sewer cross connection. The second pathway is through infiltration. So infiltration occurs through defects in the collection system, which can be caused by faulty lateral connections, damaged pipes or manholes, or tree root infiltration. Wes owns and has a closed circuit television camera truck that we use to inspect portions of our collection system every year, looking for defects so that we can find them and get them repaired. The picture on the right is an image that we collected on that during those efforts, and it shows a separated joint on a pipe. This joint separation allowed a snake to peek its head into our system and take a look. So you can imagine if a snake can infiltrate our pipes, just how much water can make its way into our system through that joint as well. Those are the types of things we're looking to get out and fix as we're maintaining our system. As I mentioned before, flow meters were installed throughout our collection system to collect flow data on how the collection system flows change during rain events. The map on this screen has highlighted in red the basins within our service area, within the West service area, that were found to have the highest inflow and infiltration related flows. Now, since West is required to treat any water that is conveyed to our plants, preventing the water from getting into our collection systems means less water that we have to treat at our plants, which is beneficial. During the collection system master planning project, there was an analysis conducted to determine if it was more cost effective to just convey and treat all of that inflow and infiltration, or to make investments to address the basins with significant inflow and infiltration to reduce them. The results of that analysis shows that it would save more than $200 million to make targeted investments in our collection system to address the inflow and infiltration. So back to these red basins. They were identified as the basins where a reduction in 65% of the inflow and infiltration would have the biggest impact on reducing peak flows at the Tri-City plant. So all of the flow projections being used for sizing our proposed outfall, as well as any future planning for the wastewater treatment facility, assume that West and our member cities are successful in reducing the inflow and infiltration in these red basins. The next two slides will show the impact of just how much show just how much of an impact making these investments can have in our collection system to the overall peak flow at our facility at build-out. This slide shows the modeled flow at the Tri-City facility, assuming no investments were made to reduce inflow and infiltration in the basins identified. As you can see, in 2080, we would need to have the conveyance and treatment capacity at our plant of nearly 400 million gallons a day. Our current capacity is roughly 80 million gallons a day for some perspective. This slide shows the modeled flow to the Tri-City plant with a successful program at addressing inflow and infiltrations in the red basins that were previously shown on the slide. As you can see, making targeted investments in the collection system would reduce the 2080 projected flows to our plant down to roughly 180 million gallons a day. So once the collection system master plan had identified the peak flows to the treatment plant, Wes began an outfall routing study to determine how we could get a new outfall from our treatment facility to the Willamette River. I'll take a moment here just to clarify that while the Tri-City plant is much closer and adjacent to the Clackamas River, DEQ has a 3-basin rule which does not allow any additional wastewater effluent pipelines to be permitted to the Clackamas River. So the proposed outfall routing study focused on going to the Willamette River, and the stretch of river was between just south of the I-205 bridge to the confluence of the Clackamas River. The goal for placement of a diffuser in a river is a location in the river that is as deep as possible to provide as much time as possible for our effluent to mix, and a location in the river that has a very stable riverbed. We do not like sandy locations in the river that can bury our diffusers. We want to make sure that it does not change over time. So to determine this location, we completed a bathymetric survey of the river in this region. We compared our new survey to historical information to determine where is a nice, solid, stable spot in the riverbed that does not change over time. So the bullseye on this figure shows the location within this stretch of river that met the criteria of not only being deep, but also having a very stable river bottom, and that's the target for our diffuser for this new outfall. So once we had the target identified in the river for our diffuser ports, we could proceed with evaluating options for how do we get from our facility out to the river. In an effort to make sure we coordinated with known projects along our potential routes, we broke our alignment into 2 main segments. The first segment took us from our plant to the roundabout at Main Street. This proposed alignment is shown by the magenta line on this page, which parallels our existing outfall along the old Agnes roadway. This portion of Agnes was abandoned by the city and is now owned by Wes, and that is our proposed alignment for segment 1. The second segment takes us from the Main Street roundabout to the I-205 interchange adjacent to McLaughlin. Wes has been fully coordinating with ODOT in the development of these segments to make sure that our project would be well coordinated with the I-205 widening project. As this figure depicts, the magenta line is a much longer route which would require a bigger pipe. The proposed alignment for this section is the orange line on this figure. And the last portion evaluated was getting from the I-205 cloverleaf out to our proposed target in the river. We broke this out separately so that we could have additional coordination with ODOT and the planned I-205 project. We were looking to see if we could potentially build this portion of the pipeline along with the I-205 bridge widening. While it was a possibility, ODOT does not currently have a firm schedule for construction, so Wes has decided that we will build our proposed project separately. We will continue to have ongoing coordination with ODOT through our project to make sure that we do not have any construction impacts. At this time, we are collecting and evaluating the geology along our alignment to confirm that we can use our preferred tunneling approach to construct portions of our proposed outfall adjacent to the river. So that is our path from our plant to the river. But let's take a look at this in a profile. So Wes is proposing to utilize a tunneling technique to construct portions of the proposed alignment. As I mentioned before, we are still in the process of evaluating the geotechnical information so that we can identify an exact location underground that is suitable for tunneling. If the measure is approved, Wes would install a tunneling launch shaft in the I-205 cloverleaf and tunnel from that shaft in both directions, both towards the river and also back towards the plant. This will allow us to stay underneath the I-205 interchange on-ramps, as well as to avoid impacts to McLaughlin. If the geology allows, we would drill all the way out into the river, then remove the drilling machine by floating it to the surface and onto a barge. This is known as a wet recovery. The proposed tunneling operation would reduce construction impacts to the public, reduce land disturbances, and mitigate potential disturbances to historical artifacts in the area. Now that I've shared the proposed route to the river, I want to provide some clarity to what our proposed pipeline will actually look like in the river. This slide shows our proposed pipeline would be, this figure shows how our proposed pipeline was actually completely buried under the river. The portions of the pipeline that would extend into the river flow are called our diffuser ports. These diffuser ports are made of a very stiff rubber, similar to the consistency of a car tire, and create an underwater spray into the river. Creating this spray underwater reduces the amount of time it takes for the effluent to become completely mixed into the river water, which is the goal. We anticipate approximately 20 diffuser ports will be needed along the pipeline segment under the river. So at many community meetings, we have been asked, how would the proposed project affect fish, Pacific lamprey, wildlife, and habitat resources? So if the proposed measure passes, construction crews would need to adhere to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's Willamette River in-water work window, which is generally from October through January. The in-water work rules were created to minimize potential impacts to fish, lamprey, wildlife, and habitat resources. The proposed new outfall location would be upstream of the existing outfall, which is near a cold water refuge for migrating fish at the mouth of the Clackamas River. If this measure passes, Wes would also deploy conservation measures to prevent impacts to seals and sea lions, which may be present if fish are abundant. So I know that was a lot of information, so I want to take a moment to display the proposed final configuration of our two outfalls. The green dashed line shows our proposed outfall, and the gray line shows our existing outfall. When our proposed outfall comes online, this would become our primary outfall. Our existing outfall remain available as a backup and to provide the peak wet weather capacity necessary for the projected flows into the 2080. The proposed outfall would provide enough capacity to convey the anticipated peak flows through the year 2040. So the next steps for the proposed project focus on permitting and completing a design for construction. If the measure is approved, we anticipate needing more than 30 permits, which will take us over 2 years to acquire. This list of permits include federal, state, and local permits, as well as archaeological related permits. So with this, I will turn it over to Dave Sheldon to dive a little deeper into where we are at on that specific archaeological process.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Sheldon. I'm an archaeologist with Jacobs Engineering Group. I've been involved in this project since the fall of 2019. My initial involvement in the early stages of the project were to conduct preliminary background research through the Oregon State Historic Preservation Office's database of known resources to help select alternative routes that will avoid or minimize impacts to known cultural resources. Additionally, I have conducted a preliminary reconnaissance surface survey of the proposed route and a site visit with potential stakeholders to discuss how potential impacts could be avoided or minimized. Another aspect of my early involvement is to assist Wes in identifying the potential regulatory framework regarding cultural resources that the project must comply with if the proposed ballot measure passes. It is anticipated that the project will require a permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the in-water work, which triggers a requirement that the project comply with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. This Section 106 process is designed to guide the lead federal agencies through a process to assess an undertaking's effect on historic properties, which is a wonky term for important cultural resources ranging from pre-contact archaeological sites to historic houses. The process outlines steps to consult with stakeholders such as the state historic preservation offices and area tribes, identify historic properties, and work with stakeholders to minimize or mitigate impacts to these historic properties through avoidance measures. If an archaeological resource cannot be avoided, an archaeological excavation permit will be acquired from the State Historic Preservation Office. The permit outlines work parameters to further explore site boundaries and characterize an archaeological resource through excavation. If previously unidentified resources are encountered during construction, the project will have an inadvertent discovery plan in place to prevent further damage until the find can be assessed by a professional archaeologist and the SHPO and area tribes can be consulted. With that, I'll turn it back over to Greg.
All right, thank you, David. So, folks, as you've heard, Wes is performing an archaeological investigation and working in compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act, as well as working with the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Historical Preservation Office. Over the past months, we've been out talking to key stakeholders, civic groups like the Oregon City Rotary, chambers of commerce, environmental councils, as well as community and neighborhood leaders. We've also been held walking tours, shared information through a number of media channels, and are holding virtual open houses just like the one you're attending today. So our goal is to make sure we are doing everything possible to educate the public on the proposed ballot measure and Outfall project and address any questions or concerns. Thank you for joining us today, and now we'd like to hear from you.
Thanks, panel. Greg just explained, it's now time to take your questions. If any attendees have any questions, all you need to do is raise your hand, hit the raise hand feature on Zoom. It's either at the top or the bottom of your device. And questions will be asked in the order received. Are there any questions today for our panel? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So I want to thank our panelists for their time today, and I want to thank everyone for attending our virtual open house. Have a great day. Thank you.